further on 4376 and 4377, we're going to go to House Bill 4434, Rep. Hall. I believe we're actually going to take that together, 4434 and 4331, Rep. LaFave. We're going to take them up at the same time for testimony. These bills passed out of Military, Veterans and Homeland Security Committee unanimously last week. And for 4434, there was an H1 sub, which is before the committee members. And we have both Representative Hall and Representative LaFave here to testify. And again, this is House Bill 4331 and House Bill 4434. Rep. Hall, Rep. LaFave, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Filler. And I do have a couple guests who intend to testify. Is it better to bring them up with me, or should I?
If you'd like to have them come up with you right now, that's fine.
Okay. You guys want to come up? Great. And I think you have cards for them too. Sure. Joel Fulton from Freedom Firearms, and then let me see here. Is what is you want to say?
James Makowski.
Okay, so difficult last name.
Them in real quickly
Right,
if they're going to come up there. James Makowski, thank you. Corporate Counsel, Michigan Gun Owners, supports the bill, does wish to speak, supports House Bill 4434. And then Joel Fulton from Freedom Firearms, Calhoun County, supports 4434 and 4331, and of course is speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I introduced House Bill 4434 because the current punishment here does not fit the crime. I view this as an important issue of criminal justice reform. That's why I have 19 Republicans and 13 Democrats co-sponsoring this. And the issue is that under current law, if you're pulled over, and the way this usually happens is you get pulled over, an officer comes to your car, the lawful gun owner declares that they're carrying, and they hand the officer their concealed pistol license. That officer looks at it, sees it's expired, okay? These are law-abiding people who've declared in most cases, and what happens then is they're hit with a felony, which subjects them up to 5 years in prison and $2,500 fine. I don't think that's a fair punishment. If you look, these individuals have passed a background check. They are lawful gun owners who just forgot to turn in their paperwork. So this bill would require those individuals, if they're caught without a CPL, if it has expired because of this oversight, they would have a year to, within that period, it would be a civil infraction. There'd be a $330 fine, and that could be waived if they get it cured within 60 days. And I worked with Representative Tyrone Carter in the last committee, and he worked with me on an amendment that addressed what happens in future circumstances. And I was grateful for his help. He actually addressed an issue I had not thought of, and so we put that in there. That makes it a misdemeanor for subsequent violations, and it passed the last committee 9-0. Sorry if I, yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience? Thanks.
Thank you for having me here this morning. My name is James Makowski. I'm the Corporate Counsel for Michigan Gun Owners. I'm also affiliated with Michigan Open Carry, the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, USCCA, Firearms Legal Protection, and last but not least, the National Rifle Association. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I've been practicing law for the past 19 years. I specialize, obviously, in gun rights, in gun cases. I have defended dozens of people who have been arrested and charged with a felony for simply failing to remember to renew their license. I want to tell you a story about a client of mine. His name is Brian. Brian is a 38-year-old union carpenter, father of 3. His church paid for him and another church member who is a U.S. Marshal to go through additional training to provide security at their church during services. On March 17th, 2018, he was pulled over for a traffic violation in Washtenaw County. He was arrested for CCW because he had allowed his concealed pistol license to lapse while he was caring for his bedridden wife who was pregnant with their second child. I fought this case tooth and nail for over a year. When people are charged with CCW for an expired CPL, there is a widely disparate level of treatment from the Michigan prosecutors. In Wayne County, they're going to offer you a plea deal to a felony, but you can negotiate with them to get a misdemeanor. In Oakland County, they'll offer you a misdemeanor in district court without even going to circuit court. Other counties will just tell you, the police officer will just tell you to lock the gun up and go renew your license. My client received absolutely no consideration for his previously spotless record, the fact that he had these letters from his church and from his colleagues supporting him, and he was forced to plead guilty in Washtenaw County to a 5-year felony. This was a tremendously life-changing event for him. He wanted to be here today, but he couldn't afford to. Why? Because his employer is being understanding, but he can't get the time off of work and he can't risk his job because now he's a convicted felon for simply failing to renew a license. This is a ridiculous situation. If this bill passes, I stand to lose financially quite a bit because I represent these people all the time. I will lose at least $30,000 to $50,000 a year in legal fees. And that's okay. I'm in favor of that. I am completely in support of this bill. Lives are being ruined by the current status of the law. We need to change this, folks. Currently, it is harder to get a Michigan concealed pistol license than it is to be a law enforcement officer. There are misdemeanors on the books that will prevent a concealed pistol licensee from having a license for 3 or 8 years, while a police officer with those same misdemeanors will be allowed to carry a gun on duty. This needs to change, folks. Thank you.
Thanks. And I just want to add a couple of things and then real quick let Mr. Fulton speak. I propose this bill because I feel this is an unfair penalty for this offense. And I wanted to clarify that individuals who are not eligible for a CPL, so if you've committed a felony and you can't get a CPL, you would still be a felon under this bill. This is only people that are otherwise eligible to receive a CPL once they renew. So I wanted to make that clear. And then I have up here with me also Joel Fulton, who owns Freedom Firearms in Battle Creek. So you want to add?
Yeah.
Yep. I can switch with you.
Sure.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I've been training CPL holders for well over 17 years now. Well over 15,000 students have gone through my facility. In that time, I've seen many individuals out of 15,000, 15, 20, that have run into situations where they've forgotten to renew their CPL license. Most of them don't get pulled over. Most of them recognize it on their own, immediately come in and do their renewal training and get their CPL license renewed. The problem is that under our current law, if you're a concealed pistol licensee and you're pulled over by a police officer, you are required under law to immediately inform that you're carrying a firearm. If my license has expired, you're running into Fifth Amendment issues, because now you're requiring me to inform an officer of what could be a felony. By putting this grace period in place, if somebody has forgotten, somebody has overlooked something, somebody's gotten busy with life, and I might remind you that when we were debating this very type of bill last year, the one representative stood up and protested it and was asked, don't you have a CPL? And he said yes, and he then pulled out his CPL license, and it was expired, and he withdrew his objection. It happens to the best of us. We, as a group of CPL holders, are more law-abiding than even the gold standard group of police officers. These are the men and women charged with enforcing our laws. They are the gold standard of law-abiding. And yet, CPL holders as a whole are more law-abiding than even police officers. Why? Because there's a list of at least 81 separate misdemeanors that could prevent us from having our CPL, not to mention felonies. These are the people who are law-abiding, honest, moral, upright citizens. We are not a danger to society. We do not threaten officer safety. None of this is an issue at all, and yet every time we have a license that could expire, if we forget about that date, we don't do it in time, we get busy, we could face a felony. That's a huge risk. Some people go, I don't even want a license, too much risk involved with it. That's silly. We have a right to keep and bear arms. We allow the government to sell us that right back in the form of a license. I think we've earned the ability and the trust to be allowed to carry. And if we forget, it's simply a paperwork issue. It is not a criminal act. It is not a violent act. It is a paperwork issue. It's missing a deadline. I don't think a felony is in order for missing a deadline. Okay, if felonies were in order for deadlines, individuals who are late for meetings would be in trouble. Okay? I certainly think that simply reducing this to a civil infraction, allowing them to go ahead and renew it, the state still gets their money out of everything, and then they are no longer considered a felon and ruin their entire rest of their lives, is appropriate. Any questions?
Thank you so much for your testimony. One second. Representative Lefebvre, and we'll take questions when Representative Lefebvre finishes his testimony. Thank you.
Very briefly on Representative Hall's bill, I'd like to just briefly mention that this bill that we're talking about is a tale of two cities. In Washtenaw County, you can go to prison. In Waseda, I was pulled over a couple months ago. The officer came up to the window, I immediately disclosed, and I tried to hand him my CPL, and he blocked me from putting it into his field of vision. He said, I don't need to see that. You a felon? No. You illegally, you law-abiding citizen? Yeah. Good, you should have a gun. Wouldn't even look at the permit. Probably because he didn't want to see if it was expired or not and be required to throw me in the back of a squad car. Had no idea who I was. So in rural Michigan, people aren't going to prison for this. It's only in Wayne and Washtenaw County and some other southeast Michigan areas, which is why it's a good bill, and we should fix that and do more like what northern Michigan does. But today I am testifying on behalf of House Bill 4331. This bill would allow an individual to carry a loaded weapon on a four-wheeler or ATV or in a vehicle only on their own personal property. With regard to pistols on vehicles, I do have a CPL. It's not expired, by the way. But I do have a CPL. I am allowed to carry a loaded pistol in my car, in this room, on my own personal property. But if I don't have a CPL, I can still carry a loaded pistol on my four-wheeler or in my car at my house, on my land, without a permit. But if it's a long gun, I can go to jail for 3 months, 90 days. I think that is a bad idea. It's a bad law, and I'd like to repeal it and make sure the law-abiding citizens can carry a long gun on their own property. So that's what my bill does.
Thank you, Representative. I believe we have a couple questions. Rep. LeGrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and with your indulgence, not a question so much as a comment. So obviously you folks have great interest in this and a great desire to carry guns, and I hear that. I'll remind you, Representative Hall, what I said to you when I co-sponsored this bill, which is that I hope that you will join me in a discussion about exactly the same thing with driver's licenses, because carrying guns may be something that you're interested in doing, but driver's licenses are incredibly important to people getting to work and going about their lives. And we have about 500,000 people in this state who are currently don't have driver's licenses for reasons that have nothing to do with their driving safety. So I hope that we can have a broad discussion about decriminalizing, making sure that regulations don't, and inadvertent non-compliance with regulation doesn't confuse us and put us into the criminal space. And that's why, so thank you for bringing this forward, but I think this has got to be part of a broader conversation about if people are intending to abide themselves lawfully in society, if they're generally speaking not public risks, we shouldn't be identifying them that way and tripping them up with technical errors. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative LeGrand, and I agree with that. And just to add a little, can you?
Yeah. One of the objections that was raised by the Michigan State Police at the Veterans Committee was that notification is sent to concealed pistol license holders 6 months prior to the expiration of their concealed pistol license. That's a recent change of about 3 or 4 years ago. I'm sorry, 2015, thank you. That's all well and good. The problem is the address that that renewal notice goes to is the address that was on your original concealed pistol license application. If you've moved in that 5-year period, and many people do move during that 5-year period, they're never going to receive that renewal notice. If that database tracked with the driver's license database for addresses, that might be an adequate protection for people. But since there's no independent way to track addresses that's set up, people all too frequently do not get those notices, something that needs to be considered.
Thanks. And again, we'll work with you on some of those other reforms like this that are paperwork oversights that lead to unfair penalties.
Rep Yancey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. You answered it in my question in part, but about the 6-month renewal notice. But when you're pulled over with a CPL, if you have a CPL, are the police aware that you have one just in the system? It's in their system, and so what database is that?
That database is actually the lien system, and a change in 2000, I believe it was 15 or 16. 14, I'm sorry, 14, thank you, Tom. In 2014, made it so that does not automatically populate anymore. It now requires a specific query for officers to know whether or not there's a CPL licensee registered to that vehicle. That does not alleviate the requirement of the CPL holder themselves to immediately inform the officer if they are carrying a firearm. So if they are carrying a firearm at the time that they are pulled over, they are required by law to immediately inform the officer. And that means it's the first time it's their turn to speak. The first words out of their mouth better be, "Officer, I'm a concealed pistol licensee and I am carrying it this time."
Okay, but there is a way in the lien system. There's a way to query or to search if
Absolutely.
an officer wanted to
If
know.
the officer has reasonable suspicion or basically reasonable suspicion, I think is the level they need to go ahead and query that, they can.
Okay, and that database though is not at all connected to the state's database for address use. For addresses?
It would be in the lien system and connected to the driver's license, but the person that is sending out the renewal notices is actually your county clerk, and it's not connected in the same way.
Thank you.
Very good.
Rep Guerra. Oh, I'm sorry, Rep Yancey. Did you have a follow-up you wanted to?
Well, I since you took testimony together, I had a question for Representative LaFave as well.
Okay.
Did you want me to?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So, can you repeat? I think you said that you are allowed to carry a loaded pistol on an ATV on your own property,
Yes, Representative.
but you're not allowed to carry a longer, like a rifle or something.
Yeah, rifle needs to be unloaded and securely locked in a case.
And
If you
is
don't
it-
do either of those things, you go to jail.
And so, what would be the purpose of or the desire to have a loaded rifle? Because obviously, there's a law in place for possibly safety?
No, the law's not there for public safety at all. The law's there to for the DNR to stop with suspected poaching violations. So the reason why somebody would want to be able to carry a loaded shotgun or a rifle on a four-wheeler or ATV, if you're tilling the fields out on your field and you've got nuisance animals like groundhogs or anything of those burrowing nature, you need to be able to shoot it. And if you have to get off your combine, go to the back, uncase your weapon, load it up, the thing's going to be gone. So it's really good for pest control with regard to farming. Also, as a person with disabilities, I oftentimes during hunting season, my father or my uncle will come pick me up on a side-by-side, and just before dark, and I'm in the middle of the swamp on my own 40-acre parcel. I would need to unload the weapon, case it, and throw it in the back of the ATV instead of just handling my rifle and just sitting onto the side-by-side, and the side-by-side has bench chairs, where it's actually much safer. The most dangerous weapon is a weapon that, A, you believe is unloaded, and you're mistaken, or when you're in the process of loading and unloading a weapon, that's the most dangerous time. If you know that a gun's loaded, and you know gun safety, and you know to aim it away from humans and things of that nature, it's a very safe weapon.
Okay, thank you.
Rep. Guerra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For Rep. Hall's bill, wondering whether the bill sponsor or his guest have any data they can share with us on the number of individuals that are being convicted for having this expired license. I know we've sort of anecdotally talked about dozens, 15, 20, but my concern is that maybe it is a very small population because people recognize an impending felony if they have an expired license and thus are actually following the law.
Can I give you hard numbers, Representative? No, I cannot. All I can tell you is from my personal experience and what I know being an attorney involved in gun rights, there are probably 100 to 200 people a year who are charged all across the state. And that disparate treatment that they will receive from county to county, it's a ridiculous burden on people. This change is needed, Representative.
Yeah, I would argue, regardless of the number, let's say it's 100, that's still 100 people who were law-abiding, who passed a background check, and then became felons because of an oversight, which leads to them losing the potential to find employment, to find suitable housing. And I just think that's too stiff of a penalty for getting to renew something within the first year, and that's why I proposed this.
And bearing in mind that, as I said, CPL holders as a group are far more law-abiding than even our police officers. So we're not talking about a group that is typically breaking laws anyway. We are individuals that seek to follow the law as much as possible. And a minor oversight, I don't think, is deserving of a felony. And it wouldn't matter if it was one or two people. I think this is a needed change in the law.
Just to expand on that for a second, I answer a lot of questions for gun owners as what they can legally do with their guns or how they can transport. I answer questions for free all the time, and I'm always struck by the fact that gun owners go a little bit over the top. They worry more about their situation and worry more about making sure they are not breaking the law than any other group of people. To say they're diligent in making sure that they're following the law is an understatement, as a general rule.
Thank you. If I follow up, if I may, are there any other licenses that, if they expired, would receive a civil fine that could later be rescinded? So are there other exemptions in state law that this applies to, or there's a similar exemption set up for other licenses? I'm curious if you know that.
Representative, I don't necessarily have an answer for that at all. Again, but other licenses typically aren't involving constitutional rights. This is a constitutional right, not necessarily something like a driving privilege.
Okay.
I would add to that, how many licenses do we know where if they expire, you're subject to a 5-year felony?
None.
And I can't think of any.
Rep. Elder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Hall, for your testimony. This is a question regarding your bill. I am a Democrat from Bay City, so we're Democrats with guns. I own about a dozen firearms. I don't happen to have a handgun or a CPL. How much does it cost to renew a CPL license?
The cost for renewing a concealed pistol license actually is the same as it costs to get a CPL license in the first place. Coincidentally, it is $115. In the initial process, it's $100 to the county clerk's office, $15 to the fingerprinting authority, generally your county sheriff. And then once you have gotten your CPL license, those fingerprints are forever kept on file. They never have to do the fingerprints again, but they still charge you the $115, and that is distributed between the county clerk's office and the Michigan State Police. So the cost is the same.
But the reason I asked, the fee is definitely less than the proposed civil fine.
It is indeed, absolutely, by almost a third.
Okay.
So, I mean, obviously it behooves you to immediately go, I can't believe I oversaw that and forgot to get that renewed. Let me go get that renewed immediately, and then you avoid the fine. You simply pay the $115 and renew your license, and once again, back on the rolls of law-abiding citizens.
Okay. As a quick follow-up with the indulgence of the chair, Representative Hall, you referenced an amendment that Representative Tyrone Carter helped you with. Can you explain what the effect of that amendment was?
Sure. This applies to circumstances where the individual would commit a second offense within that year period. So what Representative Carter pointed out was if this happens again, then we're no longer talking about somebody who isn't on notice, right, who made an oversight. And so Representative Carter worked with me on making those situations a misdemeanor with a $50 or a $500 penalty for each subsequent violation. And the committee adopted that amendment, and that's the bill before you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to commend Rep. Hall and all the co-sponsors on getting rid of this arbitrary situation. I had an exact example of this in our law firm. We were defending a gentleman who was a 30-year U.S. Army veteran, chairman of Big Brothers Big Sisters, very active in the community. He got pulled over for a minor speeding infraction, and his CPL was expired. He got tagged one of these 5-year felony charges. It took us a great deal of time to finally plead that down to a different, much smaller charge. So he had to go through the agony of that charge, seeing his life flash before his eyes with a possible felony after devoting years of his life to public service. So you're really doing a good job, and we need to get rid of this thing. Thanks.
Rep. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to thank the bill sponsors for pursuing this criminal justice reform. As a legislative body, we have pursued criminal justice reform in the last few years, but we've shied away from gun laws because, for whatever reason, it's controversial. We don't want to go there. But gun owners deserve reform just like everyone else. So thank you for your work. Glad to support this bipartisan bill.
Thank you, Representative. Rep. Guerra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Rep. Lefebvre now. Have there been any property owners charged and convicted under the current law?
You'd have to ask the Department of Natural Resources. I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I see no further questions before the committee, so thank you so much, representatives, and both of you for coming and testifying. Regarding House Bill 4434, we have Emily Durbin from Moms Demand Action. She wishes to speak and opposes the bill. And just be aware that, you know, we're moving. I'm a fast talker. Okay, thank you so much.
Hello, committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Emily Durbin, and I'm the volunteer chapter leader with the Michigan chapter of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and a Williamston resident. We are a grassroots movement in the United States of 5 million supporters fighting for common sense public safety measures to protect Americans from gun violence. I'm here today representing our group with some of our other members, voicing our deep concerns with House Bill 4434, a bill that would allow certain people to carry concealed handguns in public without a permit. I'm concerned by the fact that there are state lawmakers who are trying to reduce penalties for carrying a concealed, loaded handgun without a permit. This bill sends a message that carrying in public without a permit is acceptable. With no fear of repercussions or penalties, individuals may feel reassured that they can and should continue to carry in public without a valid permit. The permitting process in Michigan is an opportunity for our state to ensure that those people who carry concealed handguns are trained and have passed a criminal background check. Currently, a CPL in Michigan is valid for up to 5 years, at which point it must be renewed. A new background check is conducted at that time. A lot can happen in 5 years, and if a person has committed a crime that would prohibit him or her from carrying a concealed handgun during that period, the background check conducted upon renewal is the only way to catch that. My concern is that in reducing penalties for expired CPLs, Michigan will allow more people to carry concealed handguns who should not be carrying them. Renewing a CPL is not a burden on responsible gun owners. CPLs enable responsible gun owners to carry their handguns in public. And Michigan residents deserve to know that individuals who are carrying concealed handguns are responsible enough to renew their permits, are in fact abiding by the law. This bill could potentially allow people with recent violent criminal histories to carry concealed handguns throughout our state. I'm asking you today to vote against House Bill 4434 in the interest of preserving public safety in Michigan. Thank you.
You're not joking. You are a fast talker. Thank you. Rep. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you believe if someone forgets to renew their license, they're a few months late, that they should go to jail for 5 years for that? You think that's a worthy punishment?
The responsible gun owners I know are very diligent about all aspects of their gun ownership. I put an alarm in my phone to remember my dental visits. My papa used to write everyone's birthday down on a calendar that he kept so that he didn't forget anyone's birthday. I imagine that many gun owners are similarly diligent about their training, purchasing new guns, and that asking people to keep their permit valid by reminding oneself, writing it down, heeding the message one gets in the mail is something we expect as part of our permitting process, that those who need to keep a valid permit are on top of all the requirements thereof. I'm concerned that by reducing the penalty, one incentivizes folks to not think it's such a big deal to keep on top of that. And I think it's more than paperwork.
So I didn't get a direct answer. You do think it's all right to lock someone up for 5 years for missing a deadline?
It sounds to me that there aren't very many persons in the state to whom that's happening. It's unfortunate when it does, but it also seems important that the penalties for not keeping your permit current are an important part of incentivizing CPL holders to be aware of all aspects of the law and ensure that they're following it at all times.
You still haven't answered the question, though. Yes.
Yes.
Or no? Okay. Second question. You indicated these people that would fail a background check, you do realize that the bill wouldn't apply to them, right? This is only people that would be eligible for a CPL, right?
What about persons who are incentivized to continue carrying without maintaining that valid permit and seek not to be re-permitted, knowing that if they do so, they would fail that background check?
Under this legislation, they wouldn't qualify.
They wouldn't qualify for this change in the penalty, but by changing the penalties, you incentivize persons who know that they might fail that background check upon renewal not to seek the renewal.
Nothing would change for them, actually.
Rep. Berman.
Thank you, Chairman. I think going back to Representative Johnson's point that this bill only applies to those individuals that are able to renew their licenses.
Yes, sir. But I'm quite aware that laws that apply to all persons, to a subset of persons, also provide norms and incentives for others.
What's the incentive for this then? What's the incentive if it's a $300 fine versus only $100 to renew?
$300 versus $100 incentive?
You said it's an incentive. Wouldn't you rather pay $100 to renew your license than a $300 fine?
Yes, and I imagine you'd also prefer not to have a 5-year felony rather than having a $115 renewal. That's also an incentive.
You're saying about incentivizing. I think you're totally off base. What this does is creates a strict liability, missing a deadline, maybe not getting that notice. There's other factors that comes into play. I know an individual who was pulled over. Luckily, it was in a rural area. And in the computer in lien, it showed that his permit was expired. However, on the license itself, it wasn't. The date, the county clerk put it in wrong. In other areas, he would be arrested, charged with a felony, have to hire an attorney, and go to court to figure out and remedy that situation. This is a grace period only.
Yes, it also reduces the penalties.
From a felony.
Yes, sir. I understand that. I understand that.
Thank you, Representative. I don't see any further questions, so we thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Opposing the bill as written, opposing House Bill 4434 as written, Sergeant Chris Gerard from Michigan State Police does wish to speak. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thanks for allowing me a couple minutes of time here to speak about some of the concerns that the Michigan State Police has regarding House Bill 4434 as currently written. I want to start out with just letting you know that we are open to communicating with the bill sponsor, and we will be doing that. Responsibility, I think, is where we need to start here. We heard a lot of testimony about, forgetting and moving, and the renewal notice being sent to the address on file. People move every day. I've moved 5 times since I've been in the Michigan State Police, and each time I have updated my information, credit cards, bills, so on and so forth. So when we do that with the common items such as that, I think we should probably be doing that with weapons as well. I think that's where that's a big responsibility that I think we can't get too relaxed on when it comes to firearms. Though I do believe, or we do believe, that the felony is a little excessive for this situation. The change offered in lowering it to the civil infraction, I believe, is too lenient, because now we're putting it equivalent with your license plate tab and not renewing your license plate tab. Okay, if you forget to renew your driver's license, that is a misdemeanor. Okay, now we're saying that if you forget to renew your firearm, your CPL, that's a civil infraction. So them are the conversations that we need to have, but we do believe that the felony for somebody that is stopped carrying would be eligible to renew, and it's 2 days, 3 days. The felony is probably a little bit excessive, and we do understand that. As far as the notices, yes, the notices come from the county clerk. The CPL owners are notified 3 to 6 months prior. All right, and now with this change, we're going to say we're going to give them another 2 months. Again, I just think that if we're going to have firearms, we're going to own them. We need to be responsible with them. The Michigan State Police is a public safety organization. That is what we're tasked with. And I think that for us to sit here and say that we don't think this is a big deal, we wouldn't be doing what we're supposed to be doing for the residents of Michigan. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. We have just a couple questions. Rep. Lefebvre.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would the Michigan State Police be supportive of a bill to lower it from a misdemeanor to a civil infraction for driver's licenses?
I can't answer that question at this point.
Okay. Well, I just do want to point out, I very much respect everything that you and your women and men in law enforcement do for us. And while we have a philosophical disagreement on Article 1, Section 6 of the Michigan Constitution, and everybody having the right to keep and bear arms for the defense of himself and the state, we very much do appreciate the men and women of law enforcement and Michigan State Police, all you do for us.
I appreciate that. I don't think that covers concealed pistols.
And I just fundamentally disagree.
Okay.
Representative Berman.
Thank you, Chairman. With this, there's been a lot of talk about the notice. Then, would Michigan State Police be, if you are intending to keep an irresponsible behavior, if you will, as a crime, would you be in favor of changing the burden of proof to prove actual intent, that they received notice? You prove that they received notice and then failed to renew their license?
Well, I think that where you're going with that is along the same lines of, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the kind of the scenario that ended with the last person that was up here, where the county clerk or the renewal notification doesn't get made for whatever reason. And then 2 days later, you're stopped, and it's showing that the license has not been renewed when in fact it has been renewed. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm
because
talking
that's a
about
situation where that would be worked out. That happens with driver's licenses now. I mean, we got human beings that are behind computer systems. Human beings make mistakes at times right behind the computer. So if they're not updating or they put the wrong address in there, that's as simple as, we've had that happen many times. I'm sure that happens many times throughout the state, where they tell you that, you go by what the computer is saying at that time, the lien or the SOS, and then you tell them, contact the court at this phone number and bring in documentation, and that's when the judicial system kicks in, and that's when the court will work with you.
Thanks, everybody. I don't see any further questions right now. Thanks for your testimony.
Thank you.
Supporting the bill and wishing to speak, Tom Lambert from Michigan Open Carry and supports both 4434 and 4331. And again, we just let you know that we're moving quickly. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair. I'll be very brief. In regards to 4431, I wish to provide some context into situations where this bill might be relevant. Under current law, on your own property, if a hunter comes out of the field to their vehicle and wants to get into their vehicle and wants to take their hunting gear off and just wants to set their unloaded firearm into the back seat of their vehicle, that's against current law. The way the Department of Natural Resources currently enforces this law, if they lean their firearm up against their vehicle while taking their hunting gear off, they consider that upon and against current law. Under current law, if a parent wishes to teach their children marksmanship skills from the bed of their parked pickup truck, that is against current law. If a farmer wants to keep a loaded but unchambered firearm on their tractor for pest control while they drive around, while they do their work, again, that is against current law. I want to be very clear that the definition of loaded, the legal definition of loaded, does not necessarily mean that a round is in the chamber. It's any ammunition in the firearm at all, as well as this isn't just pertaining to vehicles that are moving around. The vehicle can be completely parked. There can be no occupants in the vehicle, and yet you can still violate current law. That is why this issue exists and why 4431 is important. As to 4434, you've already heard a lot of great testimony on this. I want to respond to a few things. The main issue is these people have an expired license. They don't have no license, they have an expired license. And so do we treat them as people who have gone through the system, who have applied for that initial license, who have paid the fee, who have received that training, who have gone through a background check, which is a very stringent background check, who have provided their fingerprints and put them on file to the state and federal government? Or do we treat these people the same as a criminal who never intends to go through this process whatsoever? These are not people without permits. These are people with permits who have done all that stuff and just haven't paid a fee on time. There was a comment about the background check being the only way to determine whether or not these people are still law-abiding. That is absolutely false. If you commit any crime that will result in the suspension of your license, if you don't commit a crime, if you're just charged with any one of those crimes, notice must be provided to the county clerk and your license is suspended just for being charged. The system, the police, they know right away whether or not you've committed a crime or have been charged with committing one of these crimes that would result in with the loss of your license. And to remember, I just want to emphasize this one more time. This only pertains to people who are still otherwise law-abiding. Only pertains to people who can still get their license renewed. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Rep. Berman.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say thank you, Mr. Lambert, for your knowledge and comments on these bills. They're very enlightening and distinguished those differences for those people in attendance here today. Thanks.
I don't see any further comment. Representative Wozniak.
Thank you, Chairman. With regard to application of consistency, Representative LaFave mentioned that he had been pulled over. The police officer didn't even want to see his CPL license. Do you know anything about the application of consistency in this?
It's all over the board. It's not just all over the board by county, it's all over the board by officer. There's for anyone interested in access to justice, this is absolutely an access to justice issue in addition to criminal justice reform. If you get charged with this crime, a felony can ruin your life immediately just from being charged. And if you're somebody who doesn't have the money to hire an attorney, such as Representative Howell or Mr. Murkowski behind me, how do you work it down to perhaps a misdemeanor, even if the county is willing to work with you? If you don't have those resources to fight back against the system, you just get, the system just treads on you. It just crushes you. And now you go from somebody who was otherwise law-abiding citizen to somebody with a felony where now you're having a hard time trying to be a law-abiding citizen. You're having a hard time finding a job. You have a hard time supporting your family because you didn't pay $115 on time. That's it.
Thank you for clarification and testimony.
Thank you, sir.
I see no further questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, we have a number of individuals who have put in cards on both of these bills. Mary Pollack from American Association of University Women does not wish to speak, opposes both 4331 and 4434. Frank Foster from Everytown for Gun Safety does not wish to speak, opposes 4434. Craig Burnett from DNR does not wish to speak, opposes Bill 4331. Moms Demand Action, that's Emily. Thank you so much. Does not wish to speak and opposes Bill 4434. Moms Demand Action, Cindy. Thank you again. Does not wish to speak and opposes Bill 4434. John Vanda from Moms Demand Action opposes the bill, does not wish to speak, and opposes House Bill 4434. Scott Nichols from Moms Demand Action does not wish to speak and opposes Bill 4434. I don't know that answer. Sorry. Okay. Tim Drager from Moms Demand Action opposes the bill, does not wish to speak, and that's House Bill 4434. And I believe that's all we have on those two. We are going to move to